Welcome to another episode of the Business of Speed podcast with Steve Breitenstein and Nick Breton. Today we have an amazing guest with us, Jesse Wright, who has been at every stop along the way. We were just kind of talking before we started recording this about the time he spent in the private space, all the way going through his MBA, strength and conditioning opportunities with the 76ers. But he's grown beyond that. As we've been talking about on this podcast for the last 2 years, as strength coaches, we are able to make impacts well beyond just training sessions. And that's really where Jesse has kind of taken he's written a book that's won awards and now has started his own kind of leadership. And I'm going to let Jesse go into more of that, but just giving resources and opportunities for coaches and beyond through Balance the Bar. But Jesse, we're so excited to have you on today to talk about everything under the sun when it comes to business, leadership, and speed and jump training for athletes. Appreciate you being on. For everyone that's not aware of kind of your journey, can you give us just a little bit of a recap of your stops along those key moments?
Yeah, well, first, just a huge thank you. I'm appreciative of this opportunity to talk with both you guys, Steve and Nick, and just a good opportunity to connect with the audience and learn a little bit about my story and contribute to the long list of episodes that you guys have. So I'm happy to be here. Yeah. The background is sort of work backwards. For the last 3 years or so, I've been doing a lot of different consulting work for different teams and organizations, all tied to high performance sports somehow, but just not working for teams directly. So some facility design projects, athlete testing and assessment. Of course, you mentioned Balance the Bar, leadership and soft skill, interpersonal skill development for high performance professionals. That's sort of been my world for the last 3 years. Prior to that, I spent 14 years with the Philadelphia 76ers, as you mentioned. 9 of those were as the head strength and conditioning coach, and 5 were in a role titled Director of Performance Science. And that was like a mixed bag of wearable technology and recovery, and I oversaw our nutrition team and a lot of different areas to support the coaches and the trainers and the physios that were training and treating the athletes. Prior to that, I worked in the private space, and that's actually how I was introduced to the 76ers. I worked for a private sports training clinic outside of Philadelphia. We had as many as 4 training centers, and I was with that company for close to 10 years. And primarily middle school through high school athletes, similar to what many of the independent training centers are doing. We're working on speed and education through it from a weight room perspective and everything you can do developmentally for a growing athlete. That was a really fun time in my career. And then before that, I was in football, primarily American football. I had a stop at Hofstra University as the head strength coach. I was with the Barcelona Dragons of NFL Europe for a season. My internship turned into a part-time strength coach opportunity with the Philadelphia Eagles. And then I started off way back as an undergraduate with Temple University as an undergraduate strength and conditioning coach. So yeah. It's been a fun ride. Very thankful, very fortunate to have some cool opportunities. Grateful to a lot of people along the way for helping me get there. And it's a fun story to tell. And look forward to engaging here.
Yeah. Once you're on the back end of the career, I think it's always fun to share that story. But for young coaches, it almost feels like, oh my gosh, is that what I'm going to have to go through to really make the impact I want to make? Is there any way to shortcut that a little bit? But oftentimes those stops all provide you those opportunities to grow new experiences, and it really helps shape you to who you are today as a coach.
Yeah, they really are. And, everybody's story is their individual story. And to anybody that is thinking that, I would say, create your own and don't even try to duplicate anyone else's, whether it's, an elite level profile or whether it's, staying in one place and making a tremendous significant impact in one organization for 30 or 40 years. The story is the story, and be great exactly where your feet are. And, take advantage of new opportunities if they come along, but certainly, just focus on making the impact exactly where you are, and good things happen.
I love that. And Nick and I, usually on the podcast, we start our first segment with speed training as something that we always want to dive into. And what years were you in the private space, really in that speed space? What years are we talking about?
That was from about 2002 until 2010 or 2011 is when I transitioned full time into the NBA and sort of got away from linear speed work, if that's what we're talking. You know, obviously
Yeah.
once I got full time in the NBA, that is much more of an acceleration sport and a change of direction sport. We didn't do a whole lot with linear sprint mechanics,
Yeah.
but prior to that, we did a ton. It was woven into almost daily programming
Yeah.
when you're training a lot of middle school and high school kids. So that I'll go back to that time in my
Yeah.
career, which was really fun. And excuse me, one of our hires with respect to speed, we gave Dr. Ken Clark his very first job, and he worked with our organization. Obviously, a highly sought out linear speed expert. You know, USA Track and Field. His whole profile with what he's doing now, and he got his start with us right out of his master's degree. So Ken and I still talk regularly, and consider him a resource and a friend, and so happy and proud of his journey with respect to that that isolated area of performance.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And Nick, I know that we've been talking a lot about just some of the protocols that we have in place with assessments and getting into kind of how long are people in phases for things as they're going through it. And I was hoping if you could share a little bit of kind of like what you guys do at BSP, and if that's similar for what was happening. This is 20 years ago now. You guys were kind of ahead of the curve with speed training compared to where we're at now and the influences we had. But Nick, what have been kind of those fundamentals for you guys at BSP when you're kind of like bringing in a client, bringing them through that assessment piece, and then kind of taking them into like what speed training is about to look like? If you can kind of share
absolutely.
with Jesse a little bit.
So I'll dive into that a little bit. And one of the things that I'd kind of like to hear from Jesse. So Jesse, I've got a similar background to you. You know, I was in the private sector for a long time in Indianapolis, but I was there during the NBA lockout season. And so because of that, we had a lot of guys. You know, we were the healthcare providers for the Indiana Pacers. We had a lot of those guys working with us, but one of them was Eric Gordon, and following that was Drew Holiday, which is why I'm now in New Orleans. You know, I came down and I was the strength coach for the Pelicans from 14 to 17. And so, you know, I'd also like to kind of dig into some of what you did from a speed and agility standpoint with some of your guys and what role it had in your program. But as far as, you know, BSP and kind of what we're doing from an evaluation and assessment process is, especially with more of our higher level athletes, collegiate, potential pro and pro athletes, is getting an idea of just kind of, you know, what do their movements look like? You know, Steve, you and I talked about this in the last episode, really understanding that we're only going to have them for a small period of time, being able to evaluate, you know, where are they at? If this is the first time that I'm seeing them, or if I'm seeing them for the first time in a while, compared to where they were the last time I saw. You know, are there any changes from a movement capacity standpoint? Are there any adjustments in, you know, if we're looking at from a speed agility aspect, stride length, their ability to go through movements, the ease with which they do those movements. You know, a lot of times when we have athletes coming back, they already know what I'm looking for. And so they try to fit themselves into those positions. And so also assessing, you know, the ease of those movement patterns, and trying to be able to get a better understanding of where are you right now? What are we capable of going through in this, you know, off-season window, whether it's 4 to 6 weeks while you're back from college, whether it's potentially, you know, 8 to 12 weeks if I've got you during a, either collegiate or professional off season, and just trying to figure out like how do we get you back to, you know, I think on our last episode we kind of almost analogize this to like a homeostasis, you know, back to their equilibrium, their ability to be in a comfortable position to go through movements comfortably, to be powerful and explosive, but without, you know, really dedicating all of our training to, you know, that movement standpoint. So kind of like I was alluding to, Jesse, one of the things that I'd kind of like to hear from you is, you know, when you were working with some of those higher level athletes, what role did speed and agility have in the training that you were doing? And as you were going through assessing, say, some of these rookies that were coming in or some of the trades that were coming in, how are you assessing, you know, what their movement capabilities look like, the training that they had done up to that point, whether it was, you know, in college or with another team, and how did you get them almost into your style of programming?
Yeah, it's an awesome question, and the intake process is super interesting. It's a combination of, and again, whether you talk rookie or all of a sudden the team acquires a free agent, however you get a new player, combination of objective and subjective. I always thought the most powerful, not sexy at all, right? There's no blinking lights or beeps or anything, or big old data analysis or anything, but a conversation.
Yeah.
Right? Guy
Yeah.
comes in, you sit him down, and you go, let's chat, right? And this is like day one of a guy entering in your building. It's like, talk to me about your training history. What has worked? Who were your recent strength coaches? What movement patterns have you found worked well for you? Injury history. You go into the diet and nutrition world and everything, your favorite foods, all of that stuff. You just run down all of that list of sort of information that you would want to gather that would influence your programming. You also gather that information. We would do this a lot, is trade information with other teams.
Mm-hmm.
Reach out to the opposing team strength coach. Where did he just come from? Hopefully there's some type of relationship that you have already. You have a number, you have an email, especially if it's a trade, because at that point you can exchange information. You don't just have your hand out, you're not asking, but you can give as well. And you ask all of those same types of questions to them. In addition to, how does he like to be coached? Talk to me about his poor habits. Talk to me about where, some landmines that I might not be aware of. Who's in his circle? Who should we need to know? Who's influential? All of those things. And they're all just little data points so that you don't start totally cold, right?
Right.
And that would sort of be the subjective piece. Objective, obviously, that you could go as formal as some of the popular movement screens out there. You go FMS, you go Fusionetics, you get, any one of those would help you gather information about their movement capabilities. And then, depending on who you talk to and what year we referenced, we had different versions of that. And then from a movement quality standpoint, I always favored just getting them going. Again, in addition to some of those movement screens and everything, let's get them into a program right away. If you sat them down, you had that sort of interview style, you don't have a ton of time to do that. It's like they probably came into the room to get a workout in. So you want to get them rolling as much as possible. And then you're gathering information, right? It's astute observation just through the workout to see how they squat, to see how they hinge, to see maybe some of their shoulder deficiencies, or, again, building testing and assessment into the actual training versus saying, okay, I'm going to stand here with a clipboard. And there's ways to do that too, right? Nowadays you can just put an iPad and take a bunch of, motion capture and look at joint angles and all of that is certainly capable. But sometimes your eyes tell the best story relative to your own program. So that was sort of the part of the intake that we would learn about the athletes, at least in terms of movement quality and training history.
Yeah. We were actually talking about this on the podcast, about that idea when college athletes come back, where you don't always have time to do a formal assessment on board because you only have 6-7 workouts. And so you don't want to waste one of those by just spending a whole hour going through all these patterns. But as you coach longer in this, you start to develop kind of like that go-to workout that somebody can come in, you can take them through it, and it will answer a lot of those questions for you about, okay, here's what they do when they jump and they land, and here's what they do when they do short sprints. What for you, I'm sure you had something along those lines that just was a solid workout that they go through that day and also answer a lot of questions for you. What were some of those main kind of key performance indicators for you? Was it like a short sprint? Was it a jump? Besides like a squat and a hinge, was there anything else besides that movement-wise that was really important for you?
Yeah. You look at the play. I mean, again, these were pro basketball players. So some of there's a lot of film on them, and you can just go out, and a lot of times they're out there on the court. And if you not just casually observe, but observe with sort of a critical eye for what you're looking for, you can gather a lot of information about how they decelerate, how they accelerate, full court transition. They're trying to, either get a layup or chase down and prevent a layup. You can, look at how they run, right? And linear speed and some of their sprint mechanics. So you can observe a lot of that just in their live play and just in their workouts. And not the least of which is their work ethic and their habits in workouts and all that stuff, which may gather, or provide even more information about, the type of athlete they may be in a weight room setting as well. And then you bring them into the room. You mentioned a couple of them. A simple box jump can tell you a lot about how they land, right, and how they produce force, vertical force. Squat patterns are big. Single leg squat patterns are big. You can build in, and we did build in. I was a big fan of the FRC stuff, so now you build in some of that the articular rotations to see what their shoulder mobility is, and you just weave those into the workouts, and they believe it's training, and it is, but it's also an assessment piece that you're looking at. Scapular mobility, right? You bring them in, a little part of your movement prep is looking how their scapula moves. That can tell you a lot about the thoracic spine at that point. Usually with basketball, you're looking at the ankle big time, right?
Mm-hmm.
How well does the ankle move? So just in, producing, again, single leg, double leg movement patterns, squats and all that stuff, you just see where some of the limitations are. We sort of all focus on the same areas. I think with respect to injury risk reduction, it's just sort of what is your method? What is your pattern to actually identifying?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Jesse, it seems like everybody has a goal of making it to professional at some point, working with professional athletes. It's not very common that you have somebody that's able to get there and do it for a number of years. But for somebody like yourself to do it for over a decade and a half, what do you think that it is that kind of set you apart and gave you the opportunity to hold that role for such an extended period of time? I know that we have a lot of young strength coaches that listen to our show, and they have that goal to be able to get to that level. But as the three of us know, we had talked a little bit before we started recording. A lot of it comes down to networking, being where your feet are, like you discussed, and really doing the job that you're tasked with in the moment. But what do you think it was that was able to keep you at that level for an extended period of time?
Yeah, a number of different things, not the least of which is new leadership that came in, and that happened fairly often during my time. We had 8 different general managers and 5 different head coaches during that time, and a change in ownership during those 14 years. And the first thing that I had no control over, it was literally luck and being fortunate, was just the opportunity to prove if I could do the job or not. Right. Mm-hmm. There are many unfortunate situations where new leadership comes in and just decides to cut ties. Maybe they did their due diligence and they asked ahead of time, but they made a decision before anybody was able to prove whether they are or not worth sticking around. And that stinks, right? That's a bad situation. So luckily, knock on wood, I was given at least a year to prove, what kind of teammate was I? What kind of leader was I? What kind of strength coach was I? Mm-hmm. All of that. And am I, someone that they believe they can win with in that role? From there, I think for sure, now we get into interpersonal skills. The core of it is technical knowledge. I mean, you have to be good in your space. You have to be able to write good programming. You have to be able to connect with players to do the programming, to get them coming in regularly. And attendance is a big one, right? That's difficult. Not every athlete, right? Particularly not every NBA athlete has a mindset where a weight room is part of how they prepare. So a big part of that is getting them to get into the room, right? And that's part of the job, right? So that's a big one for sure. And then once they're in the room, what do you do with them? How well do you work with all of the different worlds that surround an athlete with respect to medical and performance that are all geared towards helping that individual get better, which then leads to a greater team success. So obviously, this is, you get into high performance environments and cultures and all that stuff. There are a lot of different rooms that an athlete, and rooms all mean staffs and people that work with that. How well do you work with medical in a return to play case or just in day to day? How well do you communicate with a player development staff who's working on guys' basketball development? How well do you communicate with a front office in an off season? You're evaluating talent and bringing in people through combine testing and all that stuff. And then how well do you communicate with your dietitian and the outside medical providers and some of the scouts? And, there's this whole ecosystem of people that are all concerned with the success of the logo. And, a big part of the role as a strength and conditioning coach is, playing in the sandbox well with others and making sure that you're part of that larger team. So I think that's a big piece of it. So, it boils down to communication. How do you engage with people? How do you build and maintain relationships? Reporting was a big one for me. This is sort of before AMSs were fashionable, and it's easy to trade information. But the weight room is usually a closed room with a lot of loud music, and people don't necessarily know organically what goes on in there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's incumbent upon the strength coach to produce good reports about what's going on, and I felt obligated to do that as a definition, and then sort of as a maybe proof, or at least an opportunity to show what we were doing in there with guys. And something, I did, this is sort of a product of being in the private sector, where my first 4 years I was a consultant. So I sort of had two areas that I reported to, or two bosses that I reported to. One was the owner of the training center. And then obviously we had direct reports to the team as well. And both parties were interested in the job that we were doing and that I was doing in the room. So we create these weekly reports to be able to communicate that information. And, it's simple. Sometimes they're just little, anecdotal bullets about how a guy would do with his progressions and his movement patterns that week, latest body weight and body composition, attendance for the week. But a simple report turns into, you produce them over and over after a week. It turns into a really good snapshot of a strength and conditioning program. And when new leadership came in, it ended up being a tool that I could provide to them to give them information about the roster they inherited. Hey, we'll meet when we do. Thank you. Great to meet you, sir. Right. Mm-hmm. And, here's a little leave behind, right? It's just a little snapshot of what we do in the weight room here with our strength and conditioning. Take a look at it. Let me know if you have any questions. And when you feel it's appropriate, we can meet and we can discuss. But, it became a powerful tool for that new person, whether it's a head coach or front office, to learn about the roster. In a world that they probably don't know about already, which is strength and conditioning. Mm-hmm. Their that player and that roster's commitment to a weight room, which would be reflected by their attendance and the notes that I would have written about them, and pretty good indication of maybe my level of preparedness. Like, hey, wow, this guy produces an entire season or a whole month or 6 months worth of reports on the job that he's doing. Like, that's pretty cool. So, all of those things, if you want to sum up the answer, it's like, of course, you got to be good at your job. You got to know your stuff, but you also got to be a really good professional, right?
Yeah.
And you have to be able to demonstrate that. When you talk about longevity and some of the guys that lasted way longer than I even did, they probably have both of those boxes ticked really in a really big way.
Yeah. And that's awesome. There are two things in there that I want to hit on that I don't feel like get enough weight sometimes. One is the relationship piece. When you're in an organization like that, everybody has to rely on the other professionals in the organization. There are no silos in it, and so you don't have the opportunity to just lock yourself in the room and do what you were hired to do. That's not acceptable. But the other piece was, going through and doing things that you probably weren't asked to do. You probably weren't asked to be as involved with the medical staff as you allowed yourself to be. But the other piece too is, like you were just hitting on, is the reports, and that's something that I try and teach to my young coaches and interns, is just, taking that extra step, doing the extra piece, whether it's being asked or not of you. One, it's great for you to be able to reflect on, what did that training session look like today? How did we go through it? Did we get everything out of it that we were trying to get out of it? But also, just being able to create all of this data that you can reflect back on, but then you can also show, and so I think that those are two key pieces that I don't think get enough credit. A lot of times it more comes down to, what do we know? What courses have we been through? What additional education have we done, which is extremely important, and we all should be doing that. But there are also intangibles like relationships, like taking initiative and doing that extra piece that helps separate some people and create some opportunities that otherwise you may not have.
Yeah, you just used a great word right there, separate. At that level, everyone is capable. You're probably not in that world unless you demonstrated some level of competency in your role. So at that point in time, what is the differentiator? What separates? What would help someone sustain years and years of a career, or maybe elevate to a leadership level? And most times it's tied to some version of over-delivering, right? Being better than what was expected, or being better than your peers in some capacity. Relationship building, ability to get people better, performance enhancement, really strong technically, balanced out by interpersonal skills and the ability to work on teams and all that stuff. Some of it's matter of fact and simple, but a lot of people don't do them, right? You just talked about, whether it's reporting or whether it's just, taking some what seems to be trivial responsibility and, delivering it in a way that's better than it was before, right? Leave something better than how you found it and all that stuff. You do that enough, you start to earn a reputation as somebody that an organization wants to win with. And that is a formula to stick around. It's also a formula to get promoted or maybe be the person that's recommended when job opportunities come up, for sure, because they are differentiators, separators.
And we're talking about the pro space to start this, but those trickle down to college positions. They trickle down to private sector positions. When you are from the lowest of a brand new part-time coach in the private sector, or you're an assistant strength coach at the college level, hoping to get a director role. I was just having a conversation the other week with someone in the assistant strength coach role in the college side, talking about applying for director positions. And to start our conversation about how we're going to navigate questions, the tone was, I'm a strength coach. And as I listened, I just kept kind of nodding along and going with it. And then eventually I said, aren't you trying to do a director position? And they said, well, yeah. And I said, the tone you have is you're a strength coach. You're not taking the tone of, I'm a director and I'm going to navigate these multiple departments. And here's how I'm going to guide a staff. That's not the tone at all. And that's so important to be able to show when you're in that early interview process. And Jesse, I'm sure you've had a lot of coaches come through as interns or part-time coaches underneath you, and resumes start to look very similar after about 5 years of seeing resumes. What has always stood out to you for some of those younger coaches looking to make an impression with you in their conversations?
Yeah. Well, take just a half a step back, the opportunity to get the conversation, right? If you're just talking sort of the job application process, you're exactly right. I mean, particularly at the pro level, you guys can even imagine, you guys may have seen them. And even with your current roles and leadership responsibilities, there are dozens, if not hundreds of resumes that come into an email inbox or an online posting. And, to your point, what are the differentiators? What would even drive the decision to separate one from another to rise to that next stage, which would be a conversation, hopefully, right? Which is what obviously any job applicant is seeking. For that, it's most times less about what is on the resume. Of course, if the outliers will definitely stand out. Incredibly deficient, getting tossed, right? Big, huge, diverse background at some reputable organizations, maybe some high-level references and everything. That's an outlier too, right? But what gets you to the conversation that, again, a lot of times it's phone calls. It's people that make phone calls on your behalf. Your network. How did you even receive the resume? That's a big one, for young coaches that I have worked with that are seeking out jobs, people that we have hired in the past for organizations I've worked with and everything. Many times, I can't say all, it's not 100%, but many times it was because someone reached out on their behalf and said, hey, this is a guy or girl worth looking at. Or I got the resume from someone else and they said, they didn't actually apply, but hey, I heard you had a position open. I got a young up-and-comer who's phenomenal. You better talk to her or it's irresponsible, right? They give that ringing endorsement. Or the big one that's a little more in, a young coach's control, reaching out separately, not just relying on a job posting and not just relying on the strength of what a resume would say, but reaching out and trying to create a relationship in advance, right? And somehow differentiating yourself either in an email, nowadays, obviously social media and DMs and all that stuff. It's like, hey, I'm very interested, hopefully maybe sometime before the job actually arose, right? Because then it just seems opportunistic. But either way, somehow there's a relationship formed that you reached out. And I say this because, again, I'm thinking back to times that we made hires, private sector, team setting, many times even before I went to all the people that applied, to a job posting. You go to your file of resumes that you have already, right? Or, nowadays, it's a whole resume, digital folder in the inbox. And it's like, I'm going to look through these because I had these for some reason. And sometimes I had these because a young coach proactively sent them in advance,
Yeah.
even when there wasn't a job available. That's a great way to show initiative and you know what I mean? And you almost feel, because I was that person at one point, right? I got my NFL internship because I proactively sent out letters, right? Stuffing envelopes and watching two straight Super Bowls in January in 1997 and 1998, stuffing envelopes with that old crusty resume paper and, you know, and sending them out because I wanted an NFL internship, right? And they weren't available. You know, first year I got, 0 for 32.
Yeah.
But second year, like three people came back and were like, "Hey, I remember your name. Like, come on in, let's talk." And that stuff stands out. So again, there's the separator, the differentiator. How can you separate from everybody else? You can't just rely on maybe what your resume say. And the one you can control is being proactive about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. A lot, and a lot of the traits that we're talking about, they also lead to being great entrepreneurs too. And so, for yourself, at some point you stepped away from a designated strength conditioning role, and now you've started to step into some other areas. So, what was that time for you like? When did you know that you were ready to kind of do something a little bit different? And how did you begin to create that? How did you begin to create the life that you're now in, and create these opportunities for yourself?
Yeah. I say this as playfully as possible. The when was when the team told me they were ready to move on from me.
It's a good motivator.
Yeah.
It's a great motivator, that's for sure.
Also, some things that are not in your control when you work in pro sports. So that was clearly the when. Had no control over that one. However, from that point on, I did have what's next, and I had some dark moments, for sure, when something like that happened, and it was during COVID, which was sort of a weird, dark time to begin with for a lot of people, and just such alternative lives that we led during that time. But I remember this, right? So you get the news, and it was. And it all sort of factors into where I ended up and why I'm doing what I'm doing now. I bring my son, right? My son's 9 at the time, and got the news earlier in the day. He comes home, and I pick him up later, and we were doing the COVID wiffle ball tournament. We're playing one-on-one wiffle ball, just get outside and do some stuff that we were never able to do before. I bring him to the baseball field that we played at, and I sat him there. I said, "Buddy, we got to talk here." I said, Daddy lost his job today, right? He's not with the Sixers anymore. It's like, tears, like tears. Yeah. And then I start welling up and everything like that. And he's like, "You mean I can't tell my friends that my dad works for the Sixers anymore?" And I'm like, "Oh God, I'm the worst father ever. I'm a loser." Like, we have this like father-son moment, and certainly emotional and in every way possible. And at that point in time, and again, I had some feelings anyway and everything. You work for sports, you guys know this. Like, there's a huge demand on your time. You're up and down in planes, and you're traveling, you're attending games, you're busy when most families are home, and you got to work weekends, off seasons, all of that stuff. So I did a big sort of audit of my values, and when I'm deciding like what's next and what do I want to do, a big audit. This was in response to some great advice I got from a friend. And what are your values? What do you really value, and what do you care about genuinely at this point in time? And be real, be transparent, and be honest. That list, at the time I was 43 and had a 9-year-old son and was divorced, and what does that look like? And that list, when I wrote it down, was much different than if I would have done that list 10 years prior, or 15 years prior, or 28, when I wanted to be about the NBA, everything, full time, work with that caliber of athlete, the logo, the prestige, like all of that. And then as you look at your values, you're like, okay, like I was not present for so long, and now I would like to be. Right, my son's getting older. My father's, aging, has some health problems and everything. Like, could we create a world now where I can be available more so than I have been for 14 years or so? This is where personal, blends with professional. And that became sort of what I valued most, and where I sort of started carving out an opportunity. And it wasn't perfect at that time, but it's like, hey, could I do some stuff on my own while I'm waiting for the next opportunity, whatever it might be, and create a world where maybe you don't have to be away as much. And then it's like, okay, well, what can you do? And I always felt where I could influence people most, and this was born out of conversations along the way a lot with young coaches, is in this interpersonal side. Can you create a world where you can teach this? Because I don't think it's discussed enough. Letters upon certification opportunities and online courses, all of them are out there. Right, you guys know, if we talk for 5 minutes, we could probably come up with 92 speed certificate. They're just out there, speed and flyo and all that stuff. But the interpersonal side, a lot of what we just spent, the last 20 minutes talking about and everything, it's out there, but it's not discussed enough for how powerful it is. And that's where I started to kind of create Balance the Bar and started laying the foundation. Well, it wasn't Balance the Bar first, it was the book, but it was all part of the same formula. Where can we create opportunities for young coaches in particular who don't necessarily recognize this skill set can be learned or should, right? It's a lot of times you don't realize it until you're 10, 15, 20 years deep. An opportunity to learn it and an opportunity to make an impression that this alongside of everything that you're growing, in terms of your technical knowledge, you're getting your master's degrees, you're getting your CSCS, you're getting your first movement screen certification, and you're learning about linear speed and all that stuff. Do it. Nutrition, all of it, do it. But also seek out opportunities to grow your human being as well, because that's where you're going to have the biggest impact. When you're in your coaching environment. So that's what the book became. The intent is to grow. That was sort of my first foray into launching the information as I intended to launch it to the world came. And Balance the Bar was sort of the next step to that. The book sort of communicates it to the world in a fun story that a lot of people, strength coaches in particular, can relate to. And then a platform to learn, which was Balance the Bar. And all of that, I'll circle back to the tears on the baseball field that day. All of that, by design, hopefully, and it still continues to grow. I don't have it nailed yet at all, but provides an opportunity to be a little more present, have the career that you want, and still be present because, to some degree with a consultancy, you can sort of carve your own path, right? And you can, to your degree, that's the part I like about it, the autonomy of setting hours and work hours, building schedules around that and everything. And again, it's not, I don't think I'll ever say that I have it down pat because it's always growing, evolving, and you're looking for ways to be better at it. But that was the intent, sort of where I landed with respect to what I'm doing now versus what I did for a long time. Over the first 20 years of my career, radically different than the world I knew for nearly 25 years. That's for sure.
That's awesome, Jesse. When you're working with some of the younger coaches, what is their response to kind of these ideas? Because I know at times, like, we can be in this industry shocking, a little ego driven with what we're focused on and what we're trying to do right now. And I know a lot of the coaches I've worked with as just young coaches are going down rabbit holes of training. And sometimes it takes a while for them to come out of that rabbit hole and realize that we're all pretty much doing the same stuff. Like the young coaches that are embracing kind of what you're talking about, where are they at in their career when it comes to this idea of trying to figure out the X's and O's? Are they frustrated in their current role? Are you catching them really early and they're just excited about all the growth opportunities? Is there a certain kind of subsect of coach that's really embracing the ideas you're sharing?
Yeah, I would use the word younger more than anything, and that's sort of the target that I have angled my stuff at, because I think that's where it can be most impactful. Typically, we love that term growth minded, right? The coaches that I've dealt with are clearly in a mindset that they want to do everything they can to be better, right? And I tell this sort of pathway story a lot. It is natural for all of us. I did this. I'm guessing you two did, and almost everybody. Like the journey to get to whatever level you would like to work at for our world. I'm talking strength coaches. I'm talking ATCs, sports scientists, dietitians, and everything. That one is sort of known. It's like degree nowadays, definitely advanced degree, maybe even PhD level, and then you have to get your license or your certification or your letters. and then maybe you take it to where some type of specialty that you would like to learn a little bit more about, VBT or now force plate work, kinetics and kinematics, and there's so many different options to learn that stuff, and that becomes the core of what we want to learn. But after you decide that's sort of where you would like to go, and that's sort of the message that I like to communicate. And this is where, to get to the core of the question, the subset or the cohort of people that I've spoken with the most, they do recognize, they've listened to some of maybe the older coaches that they've worked with. Maybe they have had some, you have these examples of people that you work with that are sort of two or three archetypes. You have some people that are really strong technically, but can't connect well, right? You have these unbelievable connectors, but maybe are very average technically. Okay, but not stand out in terms of that. But then you have these, you could call them unicorns, you could call them really special archetypes where they're like super smart. You'd bring them into any like research discussion you'd love to. And then also like the athletes and colleagues and everybody gravitate towards those as well. That's sort of the unique one. And if you work even in a short amount of time, you start to identify those types of people, and you realize that, of course, the technical stuff comes from that first pathway. That's the one that's known. But then you got to find ways to sort of become that good connector piece as well. And you could wait 15 or 20 years and sort of organically let it develop as you see people get fired or you see people get promoted because of how good they are. You can certainly model after people that are like that and everything. Or you can, seek out now mostly online resources, but there's, I'm sure, plenty of weekend, conferences that address this kind of stuff. There are, I've certainly seen them and been a part of them. You can seek out ways to start growing your interpersonal skills right alongside of all those letters that you get. Right. And again, to answer your question, the most of the people I've spoken with throughout this journey are ones that understand that they get that piece, and they've come from all ages. Right. Maybe sometimes a product of failure stories, right, of either themselves or colleagues that they've learned from. I know plenty of people that have come and gone in the NBA because they weren't strong interpersonally, not because they weren't a great coach, not at all. And I know the other side too. Right. People that, again, use the word average. Nobody's incapable. You don't get there. Right. You know your stuff. But one of the reasons they are amazing is because of who they are as a human being. Just, that they recognize that. And then, you see those types of people get contract after contract. Right. Sometimes promoted. Right. Those are the people that tend to stick around because of the human element of what we do. Super important. So the people, Steve, to answer your question directly, the people that have accepted and listened and that I've engaged with the most in this journey are the true growth-minded people that get that piece for sure, and they're seeking out all ways to be really good. Yeah.
When you're talking about kind of the leadership development, because that's one of our big discussion points that we talk about all the time, and in our settings, we're always leading others, whether it's in this private space we're leading our athletes, we're leading staff that we have on board, we have coaches that we're navigating conversations with, all the way through when you were talking about ownership, GMs, coaches changing around. I would love to kind of hear some of your insights on just the leaders that were really powerful leaders. What were some of those common characteristics you observed? And when you are working with someone and trying to encourage them to grow in their leadership, where are some of those common areas that maybe you're focusing on to maybe make the biggest impact for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think two things really stand out for the great leaders that I have and that I've been fortunate enough to have been led by, for sure. And there's this first one. This is where it's cool, where your experiences and your career align with like literature, right? Isn't that great? Like when those two like align, and you can actually it's wow. Like I read this in a study or something, and oh my God, like that's how it really worked. Like those two things came together. So learning this after the fact, you start to align it. I think when you look at like leadership theory and you start digging into that, there's all the countless different words for leadership types, right? And leadership approaches, transactional and transformational, and servant based, and great man theory, and like there's a ton of them. It's really fun to dig into. you ever want to like nerd it out and, get away from some of the, some of the strength stuff. It's just cool to trace the history of it. The ones that I think work best for our world, again, just to talk theory just briefly, is a servant-based approach and a transformational approach, right? Because I think we're naturally wired to be people that like to lead from behind. We love helping people grow and get better. It's built right into our programming, right? We love building capacity and all different biomotor abilities that we write programs for and all that stuff and everything. We love helping people grow and get better, and that's sort of the philosophy behind those two approaches. As a servant leader, you wake up thinking like, how can I provide resources and provide support for those that I'm leading to be better today, right? Not as much like I'm going to tell them what to do today, but it's more like, we have goals. How can I empower them to be really good in their role today to reach those goals versus telling them what to do, right? It's a servant. And then you look at the transformational approach, and most people define it with these four I's. The first of which is like individual consideration, right? You recognize that all individuals, we as humans, we want to be seen as who we are, different than anyone else. We want that person recognized in us. We have different goals and values and objectives and families and religious beliefs and everything. We want our leaders to see that. Treat me as I am as an individual. And we also want to know that about our leaders too. Intellectual stimulation, it's okay to fail, right? I'm gonna give you some goals, right? And I'm going to create a world where you can think differently, not create novel solutions to existing problems. I'm not going to hold you back. I'm going to give you some objectives. I'm going to allow you the creative freedom to go out and do it. And mistakes are okay in that process. I recognize you're going to make some of them, right? Idealized influence, right? That's like walk the talk, right? And leaders, your actions and your words match, right? And you want that from your leadership. You don't want hollow bullshit talk. You want a leader that does exactly what he says he would like others to do. And those are the ones that get real loyalty, right? And inspire others to be really powerful for the organization. And then the final one is your motivation, right? Leaders, inspiration and motivation. That's that fourth eye. I always miss out on the fourth one, but inspiration, somebody that actually, motivates you to be better in all ways you can. So I say all of that, again, come back to answer your question. The great leaders that I had some elements of all of those built in. I didn't know it at the time. I would have never looked at, a coach and go, yes, you are great at those four eyes. You know what I mean? But I look back at them and I look back at them as a great leader because they were on point in all of those. Like they allowed me, they looked at me and what I was strong at, right? Where are my strengths, and put me in a world that I could use those, right? Found a way to help me grow weaknesses, provided me resources to help me individually get better, a safe world to sort of fail within. Again, I say safe failure. You can't make, huge sweeping mistakes. You're not going to last very long, but those safe failure moments, great motivationally, right? And sometimes that's like, the figurative hug, Jess, you're doing great today. And sometimes it's like chewing your ass, right? And sometimes you need that hard coaching, right? To be better, right? And that's the inspiration piece of it. And then without a doubt, opportunities to learn, that intellectual stimulation, like let's help people grow and get better. You're here to do a certain job, but I want to make you better so that you rise and you become something better than when I found you. Right. And that's the servant-based approach and everything. And they have this idea, they're not selfish to think like, well, the initial selfish piece is you're going to be better for where you are right now, which is this organization. But maybe you grow to be even better and we can move you to a greater opportunity that you can rise to a leadership role, whether it's here or with an organization, and we'll help you with that because that's what's good for you. And not all leaders think that way, but the ones I look back at were wired that way. It wasn't hollow. It wasn't disingenuous. It's like we want people to go, we want to hire great people. We want to make our great people better because that's what's going to make us good. And that's what's going to help them as an individual realize all of their goals. I can, and for the record, I've had people that are opposite of that too. We'd put them in the other bucket, in the other category. That's a whole separate set of qualities of people you would not want to be led by. And sometimes that's a equally or more powerful sort of reminder or an example of who you want your leader to be when you deal with people that aren't that way. So those are, again, sort of, I guess the the menu or the recipe of, what I feel, at least the good leaders have been in my life.
Jesse, I'd love to give you a chance for those that are listening to the podcast and want to connect with you and just want to learn more about your story, or they want to kind of utilize your services that you provide with any of the consulting pieces that you have going on. What's the best way for them to get in touch with you to just get a conversation started?
Yeah, I'm most social media wise. I'm most active on Instagram, and it's Jesse K Wright, JesseKWright. Love the interaction on any posts for sure. DMs, I'll definitely get back within the day. Very rarely any longer than that. My website is balancethebar.com. You can even send an email to that site. It comes directly to me. Resources, learning opportunities. There's a free app that you can download on balancethebar.com. That's just a bunch of videos and articles and stuff that I update monthly, all geared towards interpersonal skill development with high performance sport relevance. It's all targeted towards our world, anybody that we would interact with in medical and performance. The book is out there. The intent is to grow. And then within the Balance the Bar ecosystem, there's a master course as well, the next great teammate, the next great leader. So that's all the stuff that's out there right now. But a lot of times it's just back and forth and DMs and like, hey, it's probably one of the things that lessens me as a businessman, but the giver in me still loves just kind of, yeah, I'll answer your question. What so there's people out there that are telling me you got to charge for that. And it's like, hey, come on. Like I enjoy answering questions and helping people, and those are my forums to do that.
Yeah, and that community piece is so important as things start to grow. That people we've been talking about this on several different occasions with different guests, where that community early on is maybe free, and people are just asking for things here and there. But when they really start to care about you and value what you're doing, they often are so quick to invest in the opportunities you're providing because of the value they perceive from you. And that community piece is so important in that regard.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. That has grown for sure. And also, thankful to so many people. I think a really good, it is actually an endorsement, but there's probably not a better word. It's just all the forwards, people that take the stuff that you put out and they send it along. They send it to their own community, a repost here and there. Anybody listening, I'm tremendously thankful for all of that. It only helps grow first and foremost the message, which is the whole reason I created everything, was just to help people learn a little bit more. But it helps, it helps the community grow, and it helps everything that we're all trying to build together and be better for others.
Yeah, awesome. Appreciate it so much, Jesse. Thank you for taking time out. I know you got a lot going on, so carving out an hour, it means a lot to Nick and I when you're able to do that.
Yeah, well, thank you guys for the time. I really enjoyed the chat. I love the platform that you guys have, so I'm thankful that you guys gave me the chance to be a part of it.